things that we are seeing a lot every day, a reminder that there is so much stigma. So you're right that the numbers could be way, way higher that we can be able to imagine, but then that stigma prevents people or even families from coming out to say that somebody in our family or my friend, died by suicide, which is one of the main reasons why we want to create, mental health awareness and normalize this conversation so that we can change the narrative of how we look at mental health in this country.
A very good afternoon. My name is Chao, and welcome to ChiromoLaneLive. I believe we're in our third edition of ChiromoLaneLive, which is a show where all we want to do is just foster communication. We want to talk about mental health. And today, a very exciting panel joining me. I'm going to start to my left. I have got to my immediate left Dr. Mutiso, who is a consultant psychiatrist at CLMC, Chiromo Lane Medical Clinic. Now, to my extreme left, I've got Adrian Adagi, who's a mental health awareness advocate. To my right, my immediate right, I've got Gathoni Mbugua, who's a resident psychologist and social media head at Chiromo Lane Medical Clinic. And to my extreme right, I've got Dannish Odongo, who's a writer, who also writes about mental health. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
How are we all doing today?
Great.
Fantastic.
All right, so it's good to hear that we're doing fantastic because we're talking about suicide. Now, the numbers don't lie, and luckily I've got doctors on the panel with me, and we've seen that it's on the rise in Kenya. I want to know a little bit more about why that's happening. I'm going to start off with you, Adrian, and out there's a lot being said about suicide, right? Especially amongst your generation. What are the things that people are talking about?
I did a short exercise just asking what people think about suicide and why it's so rampant in Kenya. And a lot of the responses I got is, a lot of people feel like it's the only way out of their problems, out of the pain they're facing. There are people who feel like, they have no other option other than, to end their lives. And then there are those people who feel like it's, cowardly to commit suicide, or, that it's wholly wrong and people shouldn't. So there are mixed opinions regarding suicide out there, but a lot of them are just, I got no option. It's the only way out.
All right, well, thank you so much. Gathoni, I want to go to you if I can. What are some of the statistics out there regarding suicide?
All right, thank you, Chao. Let's start by saying we've seen an increase in the number of suicide cases that are happening today. So the current report, WHO, worldwide, 800,000 people are committed suicide yearly. So when we look at that, the rate is 1 per every 40 seconds. Somebody is dying by suicide. When we come to Kenya, our statistics, we had the report that was done in 2017. So the report looked at the years specifically between 2008 and 2017, and the rate of death by suicide had increased to 421 deaths in 2017 alone. And out of those 421 deaths, 330 of them were men who had died by suicide. So specifically, in that small statistic, we are seeing that there is a rise in the number of cases where suicide is concerned, but also a rise in the number of death by suicide for men. Last year alone, in August 2018, we had the statistics that were there were just in those 4 weeks, 80 people had committed suicide in 2018 August, and that's the last statistics we have. And then this year we also saw the documentary that was done by BBC, specifically in Nyandarua country, that was showing there's a high rate of deaths by suicide, and it's actually an outcry to the country and to men, but everyone in general, that there's a high number of these deaths. Yes.
Yeah, Dr. even before I get to you, I know you've got something to add. Please go on.
One of the interesting things about suicide is that more women attempt suicide than men. But so worldwide, that's unaccepted. That other studies show that. But more men actually succeed in the suicide to harm themselves to a point of dying. So we will see more men have died out of suicide, but that's just because of the nature of how they tend to come up to this. For men, it tends to be much more violent, and it tends to be much more final. So we have more men dying, but when it comes to the attempts, there are more women who actually attempt suicide than men. That's an interesting statistic.
How can we tell, because you've just explained that more women attempt suicide and more men succeed, but there are more fatalities when it comes to men. Yeah. How can we tell when somebody's suicidal?
A really good question. Quite often people don't suddenly wake up and commit suicide. Actually, let me retract that word. We prefer to talk about suicide as opposed to committing suicide because of issues of stigma, and we don't want to say people they have failed suicide. We just want to call it suicide. That's a better word in terms of especially since there are issues that have to do with stigma. So, what are some of the things you want to look for? Where there has been an attempt of suicide before, that should raise a flag. And especially where there has been an attempt of suicide and there has been also somebody in the family has actually died from suicide. Those people are very high risk. So and part of what we are hoping to do is to communicate that when somebody is coming from a place where there's a family member who has died from suicide and the person has attempted suicide, they are always high risk. That's one. Number two, where there is the person has had a mental illness, especially depression, and they have been depressed for a long time. Depression does lead you to that place where there is hopelessness, and the people get up to that place where they feel nothing will help me, and just the world is better off without me. So that's another indicator that we need to watch that. Other mental illnesses like schizophrenia, especially if the voices are so tormenting and to a place where somebody just wants out, and this seems to be the only way they want to go. It's good to watch out for when people withdraw, becomes just so withdrawn that suddenly they're not talking to anybody. They were very distressed, but they seem to be at a place of unusual calm. It's good to watch that because these are people who are like something is going on, but there will always be some way of reaching out, either in terms of words, life is useless, maybe you people are better off without me, I'm too much of a burden. Those are things to watch out. But look out, social media, if friends have talked about suicide, they could start talking about their death generally. But if they start now talking about, the dead seems to be I envy the dead. That's an interesting place to be. Yeah, I'm sure there are a few others that can be added on to. That's a very loaded question.
Very
Loaded question.
And some of those, and the response that you've given is also pretty in depth.
Yeah,
Well.
there are definitely more others, and if people have a means to be able to do so, quite often, if somebody has a means to be able to do so, and if somebody is distressed, don't be afraid to ask them, have you thought of dying? And have you thought of yourself dying? It will be interesting. They will just volunteer out, say, I've actually been toying with it. And if they have means, it means then we need to be very, very careful how to, to just pay attention.
Dannish, we've just heard what Dr. Mutiso has said, and Gathoni, and also what Adrian said. Men lead in terms of fatalities. Well, when it comes to suicides, we're talking about what to look out for. How can you tell somebody is suicidal and some of those signs? I want to hear from you, and we want to hear from you, whether you've felt this way before.
I don't know. I've never felt suicidal.
Okay.
I don't know. I thank God that it's never reached that point where I felt like I wanted to take my life.
Okay.
Yes.
But depression,
yes, I've dealt with depression. I was actually here admitted for about 6 days in December. I was diagnosed with depression and, of course, ADHD. But I never reached a point where I felt like I wanted to end it. On the contrary, my doctor, Dr. Frank Njenga, says that one of the advantages not the benefit rather, but the brighter side of the condition I may have is that sometimes I'm eternally optimistic. So I always hope that things will be better. I've never reached a point where I feel like it's the end of the road, that I don't have another way. Another thing also, I see patterns in chaos. So for me, really, when I was here, it was just, I felt like it was temporary. I was reorganizing my life, and I took time. I listened to my doctors, and I took time to reorganize my life, and actually it worked out. But also the most amazing thing about suicide is that in this country we collect bad data when it comes to suicide. For example, when somebody commits suicide, perhaps by driving into an oncoming truck, we don't say it's suicide, we call it accident. So perhaps there could be much more numbers that we are not being told. It could be like a very famous article was written in one of the blogs recently. That man apparently, was a victim of suicide. But then if you look at the cause of death, they'll probably say it's an accident and something like that. So I hope that as part of our advocacy work, it's to help decision makers and those in positions of authority to collect better data so that we're able to make more informed decisions, because I personally think the numbers are low. 440 something last year. I think the numbers could be higher. What about those who drown? How about those who perhaps suffocate themselves using
or it's, as you said, it's termed as something else.
Yes.
So that's the bad data that you're talking about.
Yes, thank you, Dannish. I'm really glad that we are having this kind of conversation, this very stimulating conversation, because one of the things that we are seeing a lot every day, a reminder that there is so much stigma. So you're right that the numbers could be way higher that we can be able to imagine, but then that stigma prevents people or even families from coming out to say that somebody in our family or my friend, died by suicide, which is one of the main reasons why we want to create, mental health awareness and normalize this conversation so that we can change the narrative of how we look at mental health in this country. If I wake up in the morning and I have a flu, the first thing that comes to my mind is, what do I need to do about it? Do I need to maybe take a concoction? If it progresses past 2 days, I'll be like, let me check and go and see a doctor. So the conversation should be as normal as that where mental health is concerned, where if you are not sleeping, maybe for 2, 3 days, and I'm glad Dannish is in this panel, that you will check yourself in, because you've realized there's something that is not right with me. There is something about my moods that is not, sitting well with me. I'm withdrawing, from people, or I've changed my patterns in eating, and therefore I need to find help. Yeah. And something that I like to also emphasize is that unfortunately we are at a space where people will only come to a practitioner when it's a worst case scenario. Yeah. If we can help this conversation be steered in a different angle, I can assure you that we'll have lower rates of admission. Yeah, because people are checking in to deal with these issues as they come.
So when it's at a crisis level is what you're saying?
That's the point where they come. Okay. But it should be when the progression is taken, because everything is about, progression. So before it gets to severity, to a higher level of severity, if we can have more people coming in to sort help, then we will have fewer people being admitted, or because they are being able to manage themselves very well. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And just also to emphasize what Dr. Mutiso has talked about, it's a good reminder that yes, we do have people who women really threaten more and even have more attempts of suicide and verbalize it even more. However, when it comes to the action, that men are likely to have more lethal means. That means that the chances of them getting through, dying by suicide, then they are higher. Yes, but women actually have like more attempts. Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Yes, Dr. Mutiso, you want to add on? Sure.
I'm glad you mentioned the issue of the accidents. One of the things that when people become suicidal tend to do is to become quite reckless in the hope they will die. So they will cross the road without looking, hoping somebody will kill them. They will drive recklessly. So many of them will go, and people who don't normally use alcohol or other drugs go and take them. And you see, one of the things that substance use does is it lowers your sense of caution. So there are many of those. Another statistic we need to have is how many people have had suicidal ideas. They have thought about it, but have not done it. Because that is really the good news. I think there is not a day I don't see 2 or 3 patients who have been thinking, maybe I'm so tired, I want out. And I ask for it. And that's really is good news that many people are not managing to die out of suicide. Because once they're able to verbalize it and you're looking for it, we can do something about. I think that would be a fantastic statistic to have. And since you are a writer, this is really a good, interesting challenge to, even if it's not a scientific thing, to just sort of go there and try and get a sense of how many people have tried and how many people have thought about it but not tried. That would be a very interesting statistic.
I love the way this conversation has just taken its own life. I love that. Now, this next question I'm going to ask is probably, interesting to say the least. Just to everyone on the panel, is suicide wrong or bad? I don't know. I feel like if we had a preacher, they would say one thing. If not, we have doctors, they're going to say something else. As human beings, how do we feel? Where am I going to start? Who's got the okay.
If you asked me that question before I was admitted, I'd say it's wrong. But unless you've worn the shoes of somebody who's thought about suicide, what goes on in their mind, unless you've been in their lives to feel the pain and the torment and the frustration and the anger and the helplessness that they feel empty and stuff. Then that's why we criminalize, under the penal code, we criminalize suicide in this country. And that's why we even preach about it in church, saying that if you die of suicide, you go to hell. But I think that is coming from a place of judgment, not a place of love. Because I think even the Bible says that love overcomes a lot and covers a multitude of sin. But if we could show empathy and compassion and tell these people that, yes, we understand where you are, we understand how you feel, we understand what's going on in your head, but there's a way out. There's a better way out. The cost-benefit analysis of ending it all now is not worth if you are able to overcome it and become a stronger person. So for me, actually, what I'm working on right now is to change the mental health narrative, so that the way we talk about mental health sometimes increases what we call stigma, because we only talk about it from a victim mentality. So we've got to do a bit more in-depth storytelling as journalists and as people who've been given the power to set the agenda, so that when we contextualize mental health issues in a way that can foster healthy debates, we will reduce stigma, we will have more preventions, and I believe it will be normalized in this country for people to have an issue. It's like having a flu, having malaria, and having all these other conditions.
Wow.
Thank you. I wouldn't dwell so much on whether it's wrong or bad, but specifically looking at that individual. Even when we look at the human rights, like it's the individual first. The person comes first. So by the time somebody is experiencing suicidal ideations, and let me also just begin by saying that, which is something that I came across, that all individuals experience passive suicidal ideations, meaning at one point in your life, you would have gone through a certain issue, a certain concern that would have made you feel so bad that you feel like, okay, maybe I need to end this, right? But when we are talking about active suicidal thoughts or active suicidal ideations, is where now the individual has gone to an extent of coming up with a plan and different ways of how I can do this. So when we are looking at that person is in a dark place. That person is feeling overwhelmed, and it's not one incident, that puts an individual to a point of actually wanting to take their own lives. It means they are boiling inside, and they don't know any other way. In fact, most of the times, in their own capacity, they feel that they have tried everything to try and deal with what is going on. So when we are able to be empathetic and reach out to that person and be able to talk to them, then we can do what we call installation of hope. And we are seeing that this person is feeling this way because they are lacking hope. And probably it's because they are not being able to function. And then we go to their level and ask, what does functionality mean to them? Is it work? Is it broken relationships? Is it education? Is it, poverty? Or what is it that this person is around their lives that is not working? And how can we be able to support them for them to get back that normalcy and that kind of hope? Yeah, and that responsibility, I wouldn't say that specifically lies on practitioners. I feel that it should begin from family, it should begin from the immediate community, the immediate society, and the people around you, which I feel is something that is lacking, in today's... Community. Yeah, because we just use social media. And I'll be like, how is Dr. Mutiso? And I'll be like, he's fine, because I saw him tweeting, or because I saw him in a panel somewhere. But in reality, what I'm just saying is that, like I saw an image of him. I really don't know how he is. So we are not checking up on each other on a human level, just finding out, how did you sleep, right? For example. What are you struggling with? How can I be of assistance? Yeah. And when we look at it that way, then we can be able to remove the words wrong or bad, and look at it as, what is it that we can do to support this person.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. Sorry.
To the person who ends up committing, who ends up dying from suicide, that seems to them the only way out. Now, most Kenyans are pretty religious. I've had many people say, if it was not because of what I believe, I would not be alive. So to some extent, I do let that work for me.
Okay.
If it is the only thing which is keeping you alive, it's a strategy we can use. But I don't want to turn back and make them feel negative or unappreciated. I like what you said, because the first important thing with anybody who is thinking of tragically ending their life is to try and save that life.
Yes.
And there may have been times when that person has made reached out and it ended up being a false alarm. We never, as we are in the mental health field, we never want to think anytime that this is a false alarm. It's a life at stake, and it's as far as they're concerned, this is the only way out. So holding out hope becomes a very, very important thing. One of the things that we would do now, this is towards where there's a way of assessing risk. And when we assess risk and we feel it's not too bad, we can probably manage this, is we'll get into a contract. And a contract is basically an agreement. Quite often I'll say to my client, here is my card. These are my private numbers. You can call me 24/7. Even if it's the middle of the night, you can call me. I'll be on the other end. And just that, in many ways, just tells this person, I am valued. Yes. And of course, if we are in a clinical situation, if somebody is seriously thinking of taking their lives, that's one time you can break confidentiality. There's a life at stake here. You will need to let the next of kin know this person. Somebody needs to keep an eye on them. So there are things we can do, but just listen to them and not condemn them. They are already feeling so condemned that they feel the world is better off without them. And they want, to some people, suicide is making the ultimate sacrifice of themselves in order to relieve the world, to relieve the next of kin of any problems. And I like really what you said, because when the narrative is there, just being able to connect with them, they start hearing another narrative. What's going to happen to the people who are left? What's going to happen to them? Who's going to find you when you're dead? I mean, these are questions we do ask. It sounds pretty crude, but you got to do what you got to do in order to save a life.
Yeah.
Yeah.